Russia is a country of unbelievable scale. It is so massive that one could fit the United States, China, India, and several European countries inside its borders and still have land left over. Stretching across Europe and Asia, Russia covers more than 17 million square kilometers, making it the largest country on Earth. But despite possessing all of this land, something strange stands out. Russia's population is only around 145 million people. That means this giant nation has fewer people than countries that are many times smaller. For comparison, Bangladesh, a country nearly 100 times smaller than Russia, has a larger population. Even Nigeria, whose territory is tiny compared to Russia, has far more people. So why is one of the largest countries in history home to relatively few people? Did Russia simply fail to attract settlers? Is the climate too harsh? Or is there a deeper story behind this enormous empty space? To answer that question, we need to travel back thousands of years and discover how geography, climate, history, and modern demographics combined to create one of the most fascinating population mysteries on Earth. And at the end, we will answer one incredible question. Could Russia ever have 1 billion people? Russia occupies about 11% of the Earth's land area. The country stretches across 11 time zones and spans more than 9,000 kilometers from west to east. If you boarded a train in Moscow and traveled all the way to Vladivostok on the Pacific Ocean, the journey would take nearly a week. Russia borders 14 countries and touches both Europe and Asia. Yet despite this enormous territory, much of the land is surprisingly empty. In fact, the average population density of Russia is only around 8 people per square kilometer. Compare that with India, where more than 470 people live in the same amount of space. Even more surprising, nearly 80% of Russians live in the western part of the country, which represents only a small fraction of Russia's total land area. That means huge portions of Siberia and the Far East are almost completely uninhabited. Some areas have population densities lower than those found in deserts. But why? The answer begins with geography. When many people think of Russia, they imagine snow, ice, and endless forests. And there is a reason for that. Around three-quarters of Russia's territory lies in Siberia and the Far East, regions famous for extremely cold temperatures. During winter, temperatures can fall below minus 50 degrees Celsius. In places like Oymyakon, one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth, temperatures have dropped below minus 70 degrees. Building cities, roads, railways, and infrastructure in these conditions is incredibly difficult. The ground itself creates another problem. Much of Siberia sits on permafrost. Permafrost is permanently frozen soil that can remain frozen for thousands of years. Constructing buildings on permafrost requires special engineering because if the ground begins to thaw, structures can collapse. Farming is also extremely challenging. The growing season is short, and many areas remain frozen for much of the year. Unlike fertile regions such as India, China, or Western Europe, large sections of Russia simply cannot support dense populations. Nature itself places strict limits on how many people can comfortably live there. Russia's population history has been shaped by centuries of conflict and hardship. The Mongol invasions devastated many regions. Later came wars against Napoleon and numerous conflicts with neighboring powers. But the greatest demographic catastrophe arrived during the 20th century. World War I, the Russian Revolution, and the Civil War caused millions of deaths. Then came the Stalin era, marked by famines, purges, and forced labor camps. And after that, World War II struck. The Soviet Union suffered perhaps the highest losses of any country involved in the war. Historians estimate that around 27 million Soviet citizens died. Entire cities were destroyed. Generations of families were wiped out. These losses left a deep scar that affected population growth for decades. Even after the war ended, the Soviet Union never fully recovered from the demographic consequences. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Russia entered one of the most difficult periods in its modern history. The economy crashed. Millions of people lost jobs, poverty increased sharply, life expectancy declined, birth rates fell dramatically. For years, many Russians chose to have fewer children because of economic uncertainty. At the same time, Death rates increase. As a result, Russia experienced what experts call a demographic crisis. Unlike countries such as India and Nigeria, where populations were booming, Russia's population growth slowed and even declined. Today, one of Russia's biggest concerns is not overpopulation. It is population decline. Eastern Russia is a huge forest with extremely poor soils for agriculture, extremely cold winters, and hundreds of kilometers of bogs and other impassable terrain. Also, very hot summers for the latitude, and clouds of mosquitoes that darken the sky. It's also quite impossible to improve the infrastructure by building roads. Cold winters and hot summers destroy tarmac on roads, while the thaw in spring will flush them away, create potholes bigger than lorries, and turn whatever remains into giant lakes of mud where cars sink without a trace. The bears and wolves don't actually register compared to the other drawbacks. One possible solution would be immigration. Countries like the United States and Canada have grown significantly through immigration. Russia has attracted migrants from former Soviet republics such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. However, immigration levels are not high enough to dramatically change Russia's population. In addition, harsh climates and limited opportunities in remote regions discourage large-scale settlement. Many migrants prefer major cities instead of isolated parts of Siberia. Therefore, immigration alone cannot fill Russia's enormous empty spaces. While low population density creates challenges, it also provides advantages. Russia possesses some of the world's largest reserves of oil, natural gas, coal, timber, and minerals. Its vast forests help absorb carbon dioxide. The country has enormous freshwater resources and huge agricultural potential in some regions. Many experts believe that in a future world facing resource shortages, Russia's land and natural wealth could become even more valuable. In other words, empty land is not necessarily useless land. Sometimes space itself becomes a strategic advantage. At first glance, it might seem possible. After all, Russia has more than enough land. But land alone does not determine population. Climate, fertile soil, economic opportunities, infrastructure, and demographics matter far more. To reach 1 billion people, Russia would need centuries of sustained population growth or massive immigration on an unprecedented scale. Considering current trends, experts believe such a scenario is extremely unlikely. So the answer is no. Russia has enough space for 1 billion people, but space is not the same as livable land. And that is the reason why the largest country on Earth remains one of the most sparsely populated. Russia's greatest strength has always been its size. But ironically, that same size is also one of its biggest challenges. The frozen giant called Siberia. Just how cold is Siberia? To understand why population is so sparse, imagine living in a place where winter temperatures can fall below -50 degrees Celsius. Cars must often be kept running for hours to prevent engines from freezing. Pipes can burst, roads crack, and even simple outdoor activities become dangerous. In some regions, winter lasts for more than half the year. Such conditions make daily life extremely challenging and discourage large-scale settlement. Could Russia actually support a much larger population? Surprisingly, yes, but only in certain regions. European Russia contains most of the country's fertile land and major cities. If population density there were similar to Germany or France, Russia could support hundreds of millions of people. However, most of the country's territory is not suitable for dense settlement, meaning the enormous size of Russia can be misleading. Why were Soviet losses in World War II so devastating? The Soviet Union suffered casualties on a scale almost unimaginable today. Entire villages lost most of their young men. Millions of civilians died from famine, occupation, and battles. Since those lost lives would have had children and grandchildren, the demographic impact continued for generations. In many ways, Russia is still feeling the effects of those losses today. Did the Soviet Union try to populate Siberia? Yes, during the Soviet era, the government invested heavily in developing Siberia. New cities, factories, railways, and mining projects were built. Millions of people moved east, attracted by higher wages and government incentives. However, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, many residents left these remote regions and returned to Western Russia. Could Russia ever become warmer and more populated? Some scientists believe that climate change could make parts of Siberia warmer and more suitable for agriculture. But would that really be enough to attract millions of people? Or would the melting of frozen ground create even bigger problems? Why didn't China expand deep into Siberia? Russia and China share one of the world's longest borders. Yet despite China's enormous population and Siberia's vast empty lands, the border has remained surprisingly stable. Why? What if Siberia were an independent country? Siberia alone would be larger than Canada and the United States combined. It would possess huge reserves of oil, gas, gold, diamonds, timber, and fresh water. But with relatively few people, could such a country survive on its own? Could Russia's empty land become its greatest advantage? In a world facing shortages of food, water, and natural resources, Russia's vast forest and freshwater reserves may become increasingly valuable. Could these empty lands one day become one of the country's greatest strengths? Why are some Russian cities built in places where temperatures reach minus 50 degrees Celsius? Cities like Yakutsk and Norilsk exist in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Why would anyone choose to live there? And how do people survive such extreme winters? Why does Russia have 11 time zones? Most countries have just one or two. Russia has 11. In fact, while people in Moscow are eating breakfast, others in the Far East are already ending their day. If you enjoyed this journey into the geography and mysteries of our world, don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments which country should we decode next.